Hello, Alex here, and today we're going to talk about my first roll of Kodak's Ektachrome E100 film, which I shot in 120 format on the Pentax 6.7. Let's get into it. Kodak's Ektachrome E100 is available in 35mm, 120, 4x5, 8x10 and even Super 8 formats. It is designed for development in the E6 color reversal process, which, as I mentioned in my previous video on Fujifilm's Provia, is a less common process and generally costs a bit more to get your film developed in that versus the C41 process that standard color negative films use. The film has an ISO rating of 100, which is slow in the absolute sense, but is on the higher end of what you can get with slide film nowadays. There's only one on the market, which is not even actually made anymore. It's repackaged, which is faster than 100 speed. So it's pretty quick as they go. Color positive film, or as I mentioned, slide film, is called so because it's traditionally mounted into little slides that you can project on the wall and actually show your images that way. We don't really do that anymore, but there's still a magic about seeing the image right in front of you in your hands. Here you see the film. I was going to say negatives, but they're not negatives. The positives from this roll of film, and they look amazing. Like, I did some minor color corrections in post-processing, but it's just amazing to actually see a real image embedded into the plastic there, created with chemistry and light. That's so goddamn cool. I shot this roll on the Pentax 6.7 with the 105mm f2.4 lens. This gave me 10 frames to work with. One of the shots was bracketed by +1.5 stops just to ensure that I nailed the exposure, and another one was a portrait of my co-worker's son, which I'm obviously not going to show. So this gave me 8 distinct frames to work with, of which 7 were actually correctly exposed, which I was pretty happy with. I only actually like the composition and colors of 5 of them, but I'm going to show them all because I think that's part of the appeal of this mini-series. You know, they aren't full reviews, but I'm showing the good and the bad. I didn't actually have this roll of film developed at my local lab, but by Patrick of Sprocket Holes, whose channel and Instagram I will link down below. Thank you very much, Patrick, for doing this for me. Firstly, this film is incredibly sharp. I know I say that about a few film stocks now, but the accutance and level of detail that's rendered with this film stock is absolutely incredible. I mean, part of that is because it's a bigger negative, being 120 versus 35mm, but nah, it's really good. A lot of these pictures are actually cropped quite a bit, like an APS-C kind of crop, like quite heavily, because of the minimum focusing distance of the 105mm, which is 1 meter, which, you know, for a 50mm equivalent field of view is really far. And even then, the detail is still absolutely insane. Related to the incredible sharpness is the grain, or lack thereof. I know a couple of people who will not like to hear about a film with basically no grain, but in 120 format, there basically isn't any to see. Even in like the darker, slightly underexposed regions of some of the pictures, you don't really see it. It's incredible. I won't say it looks digital because it doesn't, but it's very, very good in that regard. I'm going to call this a pro and a con because I think that's fair. It has a blue cast, basically, and a lot of people know that about this film stock already. But Provia has a purple cast, as I mentioned in that previous video. And if I had to choose one or the other, I'd go for the blue cast. One of the things I didn't like when I used to shoot Fujifilm digital was that a lot of blues turned a little bit too purple. And that kind of just gave me a bit of an aversion to purple casts, if that makes any sense. Like, it turned out quite nicely for a lot of the pictures I shot with Provia that time. But it also didn't work for a lot of them too. And in the bright daytime, I'd say that the blue cast of Ektachrome works better than the purple cast of Provia. Fair is fair. I did say I would mark this as a con as well. It has a blue cast. Slide films seem to have some sort of a cast, and that's just part of what you get. But personally, I'd rather have a blue cast than a purple one under most circumstances, at least under bright daylight. The film and its development are expensive. E6 development costs, I don't even know how much anymore here, it's been a while since I checked, but the film itself, locally, costs €20 for a roll of 35mm and €16 for a roll of 120. Sure, I can get it cheaper from like Mako or Safelite Berlin for like 16 and 12 respectively, I think. Maybe it's 16 and 13. But then I have to pay for delivery and wait for the film. So even then, that's still pretty expensive. I mean, you compare that to people who are shooting, you know, €5-6 rolls of Kodak Gold and 35mm, you're still talking 3 to 4 times as much money for a lot fewer shots. So there's definitely like a disparity in prices there, and that's a common theme with slide film. Whether you like it or not, it's just part of the game. Again, this is a slide film thing, not specific to this film, but it has a very limited dynamic range. This is the portrait that I shot where I bracketed the shot by plus 1.5 stops. This is the frame where I metered darker, as in more towards the highlights to preserve those, and it came out nicely. You can actually see I missed focus a little bit, which is annoying, but we still like the print of the photo I gave him. Thank you, John, for letting me take that picture. But the one that was plus a stop and a half was absolutely unusable. It was incredibly blown out in the sky and on the brighter parts of his skin and in the trees. And everything took on a green cast, but not like that urban gritty green cast, like a bleach bypass film or Lomachrome Metropolis kind of thing, but like an ugly green cast, like baby vomit. Honestly, I'm just going to say the exact opposite of what I said in the Provia video here. If you want to shoot slide film and it's new to you, shoot Provia or Ektachrome. Don't shoot Velvia when you're starting out. It's way too much for starting out. Like I mentioned, I think I prefer it for daylight shooting under harsh sunlight versus Provia. But then I think I prefer Provia for overcast, kind of blue hour shooting. But that's something I'll have to test a bit more in the future, a bit more rigorously to actually see which one I prefer. But at the moment, I'm leaning towards Ektachrome. Yeah, I recommend it. It's expensive, as I mentioned, but you know what you're getting into now, and I think it's really rewarding when you see those perfectly exposed slides. But, you know, maybe try it in 35mm first so you can more affordably bracket your shots to make sure you get a good exposure. But it is a really nice film in its own right, and the results speak for themselves. So while I was editing this video, I felt that there was something missing, for lack of a better word, and I think it's basically that with just 10 shots per roll in 120, these My First Roll videos taken on 120 film aren't going to have as many pictures, naturally. You know, 10 frames versus 36 frames with a roll of 35mm. So what I've decided to do with this video and all future videos, unfortunately I can't go back and add to the ones that have already been recorded, is I'm going to talk about my 3 favorite pictures from the roll. And that brings more of a focus onto this being my first roll and not focusing on technical stuff any more than I already do. And you know, this will allow me to talk more about the shooting process, like settings, what inspired me to take the shot in the first place, why I didn't take a different shot, why I prefer this one to another one, that kind of thing. So we'll just go ahead and talk about my 3 favorite pictures from this roll. Okay, so this picture is my 3rd favorite of the roll, and it's the first that I took. I metered this and I really wasn't sure what to do, so I'm glad that this came out quite well. It was a very complex scene and it was quite busy, so I wasn't sure about the metering, but I just spot metered all over this tree when the cherry blossoms were in bloom, and thankfully it worked out. I think this was about 1/250th at, it was definitely f4. I remember that because f2.4, actually I don't remember why I didn't shoot it at f2.4 if I wanted to get that super duper bokeh from the 105mm, but it was definitely f4 for sure. I really like how it came out. The blue is kind of a deep, rich blue. It's not too teal, but there's not a purple cast with it either. And this is kind of the thing that Ektachrome is known for. And then you have obviously the pinks and oranges and the kind of red tint in the cherry blossoms themselves that contrast in a, what in retrospect is a very Hollywood kind of way, that orange and teal. Oh god. But I think it works quite nicely. I did have to crop this quite heavily because the minimum focusing distance of the 105, as I said, is really bad. But it works. I think it works quite nicely. You've got the two branches framing that central cherry blossom. The background is a bit busy. It would have been nicer with a longer fast lens, but I chose to use the 105 for this roll of film. That was just something I set out to do. Okay, this next picture. This guy, his name is John. I met him when I was out for a walk around the park, and I did 3 laps around the park before I actually got the nerve to go up and ask him. And if you want to take someone's picture, just ask them. I've done it a few times. I'm getting better at it. But okay, the main reason I didn't want to disturb him was because he was playing golf. He was practicing his swing, and I didn't want to disturb him, especially given the pandemic and everything. But he was totally cool with it. I just asked him if I could take his portrait, and he was so down for it. So much so that after I got his details from him, got the film developed, and I got an 8x10 print and a frame for him as thanks. When I rang his house, his wife answered the phone, and she was insistent that I had the wrong house because she refused to believe that he would have allowed some random stranger to take his photograph. And I just think that's hilarious that it was apparently completely uncharacteristic for him, but he was totally down for it. So obviously golf is not Gaelic football. It's not football, it's not rugby. But I framed him in between the 2 sets of goalposts, well, the goalpost and the nets. And it worked really nicely, I think. I would have liked to have gotten a bit closer. I didn't really feel that comfortable getting too close to him. Obviously, pandemic reasons. I couldn't focus with my mask on because at the time, the only masks that I was able to get were quite bad at fogging up my glasses. And my focusing eye is my bad eye, so I couldn't see that well without my glasses to focus. And also just because he's an older guy, I didn't want to put his health at risk. But, you know, I cropped a bit. This is wide open at 2.4, by the way. This is the shot that was at 1/1000th. So wide open on both the shutter and the aperture. Regardless, I think it came out quite nicely. And he was absolutely delighted with it. He kept trying to give me money when I dropped it off to his home. Yeah, so this third picture. This was the 9th frame on the roll. And I am so happy with the way this came out. This was not even going to be a snapshot, a snap shit, as someone like Spack would say. I didn't expect this to come out nicely at all. I just thought when I was walking past McDonald's on the way back from the park that it kind of looked a bit nice with the way the light reflected in from the inside of the arch. So that just caught my glasses and got my attention. I vaguely remember metering on the very right hand side of the arch, so that yellow strip on the right. And it really worked out. There's a really nice glow around that central part. I have a Pro Mist. I was convinced that I'd used the Pro Mist for this shot, but I didn't, as it turns out. And I can only imagine what that would have looked like. I did crop this a little bit because obviously the 105 is only so long, and this was on top of the roof of the McDonald's, so I couldn't climb up to get closer. But it still works really, really well. I'm so happy with the way this came out, even if it is, you know, corporate nonsense. It's just a very nice picture to look at, in my opinion. The gradient of those blues is, it's beautiful. Okay, so I'm going to stop ranting and waxing philosophical now. So let's go back to the conclusion that I originally recorded. Thank you for sticking to the end of this, my first roll video, where I talked about Kodak's Ektachrome E100. I appreciate you sticking around, and if you consider subscribing, or perhaps even donating to my Patreon, where the tiers start at just €1 per month, I'd really appreciate the support. If you have any recommendations for what I should try a single roll of next, let me know in the comments below, or shoot me a DM at Instagram at Shaka1277, where you should also be following me to see new photographs every single day. Stay safe, and bye bye for now.